success is something which will look different depending if I'm judging myself as a father today, as a researcher today, as a psychologist today, as a partner today. And that level of success, depending on each of those lenses I'm looking through, will differ quite a lot. But I'm not kind of looking through it necessarily as, have I been successful? Because I think that if you're thinking successful, that can have a tendency to lean into black or white, successful or not. And that dual way of thinking loses all of the continuum or the gradients or in between.
Do you want to share about how you use meditation as a tool to help people become more compassionate?
There's lots of different forms of meditation. One aspect of meditation is becoming more familiar with your mind. And so mindfulness can help with that, becoming more familiar with where my mind drifts to, where it goes to, what are the natural patterns of my mind state. So it's becoming more familiar with your mind.
And I guess there are all of the physical things you can do and the different types of habits. And even practicing meditation is a way of practicing compassion or actively creating a more compassionate world for you.
Yeah. And then the second part of meditation is
You're listening to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we hold conversations with the most holistically successful people we have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their life-changing events, their perspectives, their mindset, and most importantly, their purpose. I'm Harry Goldberg, host, interviewer, and interrogator of this podcast. Father of the most incredible daughter in the world, husband of an incredible woman, and director and empowerment coach at Purpose Advisory. Hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and like below. Now, let's begin. James Kirby, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Harry.
It's my pleasure to have you here. For the benefit of the listeners, you've spent almost your entire career researching compassion, as well as practicing as a clinical psychologist, focusing on compassion-based therapy and compassion-based work. And so I'm really excited to hear a lot of the insights that you have about compassion. I have read most of your book; it's somewhere behind me, and I'm looking forward to sharing a lot of those messages with the world. But before we dive into specifically compassion, I want to hear more about your journey and your mindset. So to start with, how do you define success?
Yes, it seems like a fairly simple question on the surface, but of course it's much trickier, and the more you dig into it. I mean, I suppose success simply for many, it's just the idea of, reaching your goals that you kind of set yourself. But how do you go about setting those goals, and who values the success is where it gets, I think, a bit trickier. I could feel successful, but people looking at me might go, oh, he's not very successful. And likewise, I might feel like I'm not very successful with where I'm going. But people around me are like, oh, wow, look at all that success you're having. So, it's interesting. Sometimes success is in the eye of the beholder, and we can be really tough judges at times of our own successes, and also just what we put value on in terms of those goals. So all of those things mixed in can make success tricky.
All right. So if I try and feedback what I've heard you share, so I can get closer to that, what that definition would be, it's something along the lines of being able to assess what your values are and what's most important to you, and then being able to live in line with that. Yeah,
that's a pretty good summary. I suppose for me, it's just achieving goals. I find it very pragmatic. I haven't got a kind of philosophy, I suppose, to success. To me, I see successes as can be super small or super big. And then if they're bigger, perhaps the value importance is higher. But for me, sometimes success is just getting my kiddo dressed in time for school. Life-changing impact that success has been. It's obviously incredibly small, but for me, it's like, yes, I did it.
Is that a part of it? Like small successes every day? Like as in you can finish your day and you felt successful that day, and enough of those, does that make you successful?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't keep success as a barometer. So I'm not big on the kind of monitoring of that kind of stuff. But I think that's the trap of success. I think we can become particularly with depression, which is the work I do a lot in. A lot of people are hyper monitoring their performance and output constantly, and then socially comparing that output. And as a result, can often feel this kind of sense of inferiority that comes with that. So yeah, like you say, so part of it is can we start to break it up into smaller little things that are important to you, but equally, can you see that you're contributing in a meaningful way to someone else, and that isn't beholden on the outcome?
Okay, so let's dive into that, because I suspect that's a very important part of what holistic success is. Like a lot of people who are listening to this, I don't know, just imagine someone who's in their 30s to 40s and they're really focused on, like, they've already had some success in their careers, they're already doing well, maybe they're starting to move into leadership roles,
Sure.
and they're starting to think, well, what is success? Like, how can I know that I'm being successful? Surely it's not just about what my title is or how much I'm getting on my paycheck. There's more to it, right? So this contributing to the world in a meaningful way. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I guess in some ways it's getting to this idea that, okay, I've got my degree or my expertise, or I've done my apprentice, whatever it might be, in this area of work, or in my field, whatever. And then what I would do is kind of, because I'm interested in compassion, and compassion's kind of focused on how you can help address suffering. It's kind of how can you use that skill set that you've now acquired in a way which kind of contributes or helps humanity, particularly in regards to suffering. But it's not usually a question we ask ourselves. It's not often a question we'll kind of put in that kind of frame of, okay, how can I take what I've got to help shape it in a better way? Often it's a case of how can I secure perhaps a job, a promotion, start to get my career going. I've got a mortgage or a house deposit I'm saving for. And then, of course, it becomes very kind of, inward, narrow focus, which is, of course, just part of nature. It's part of the world we live in. But yeah, just opening it up, and what could perhaps be something that uses your skill set in a way which could perhaps reduce suffering beyond your immediate kind of circle.
Okay, so can we explore then what suffering is?
Yeah, sure. Now there are many different kind of definitions of suffering. The dictionary basically will just kind of talk about it as being perhaps a distress or pain that you're experiencing. In Buddhism, they don't. The kind of suffering stems from this kind of concept called dukkha, and dukkha is about this idea of kind of unsatisfactory state that you're in, and that's because you perhaps haven't been able to obtain what you're wanting, or you're trying to avoid something. So it's like grasping and avoidance brings dukkha, a state of dukkha. Uh, but in our scientific work at the university, we kind of look at suffering as emotional suffering. So that's kind of perhaps the anxiety or sadness that you might be feeling. Physical suffering, which obviously could be, a broken leg or an illness or something
Mm.
along those lines. But also lack of resource. So you could be without a home, you could be hunger. This would be a different state of suffering, which a resource could kind of help with, or assist that kind of level of suffering. There can, of course, be overlapping of all three, but depending on the suffering you're coming into contact with, your kind of response or your behavior will of course, differ.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about using compassion or using the success that you have to be more compassionate, i.e., to reduce human suffering or suffering in general, perhaps,
Yeah.
you're then saying that you can identify people who are in emotional suffering, physical suffering, resource suffering, and you're able to find ways to alleviate the suffering for them at where they're at. Or is there, like, what else is there? Like, if this kind of sounds like it's an important part of your definition of knowing that you're being successful, so I'm curious to dig a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, I don't. Again, with the success, I don't know if I've got a key idea of what success is. Um, Again, I think success is not how I would assess myself.
Mm.
I would be more focused in on, okay, success is something which will look different depending if I'm judging myself as a father today, as a researcher today, as a psychologist today, as a partner today. And that level of success, depending on each of those lenses I'm looking through, will differ quite a lot. But I'm not kind of looking through it necessarily as have I been successful, because I think that if you're thinking successful, that can have a tendency to lead into black or white, successful or not. And that kind of dual way of thinking loses all of the continuum or the gradients or in between. It's not that to say that people do that, of course, but I feel like there's a tendency, no, that was successful or not. So I kind of get a sense of, when it comes to trying to use what you've got in a way that's beyond you, again, there's no right answer to that. One could just be contemplating the idea. Okay, well, I've got all these skill sets in psychology, for example. What's something I could do that will perhaps be of benefit beyond perhaps me benefiting immediately? And then what would that kind of look like? Is there areas that I kind of gravitate naturally towards where I feel like psychology or my skills in psychology could be really useful? So, for example, it could be aspects to do with helping those seeking refugee or asylum. So is there a way that I could perhaps use that skill set by connecting with those in that position, which might require me taking a bit of a sacrifice, but at the same time, using my skills in a way that might offer help?
Yeah. Okay. And you've pushed back against the term successful a couple of times. I understand the reasons why, because you just elaborated on it. I'm curious and you did reference that you've seen it come up quite a bit with your patients, as psychologist patients. What's the alternative to focus on then, instead of success? What else can you look at instead?
Yeah, that's a great question. So success is an outcome, right? So I'd be focused on, what is it that you'd like to be doing? In what areas would you like to be doing? And so if I'm working with someone clinically, it's kind of like, okay, this is where we are now, and this is how you're feeling now. Where would you like to be going? What would you like to be focused on working on together in our time? And then we start to break that down on what that might look like. And you can look at it across, as I mentioned before, those different fields. So you can start to look at it in the case of career or family, friends or health, whatever it might be. But the idea is starting to put into place some ideas on what it is that you might be wanting in that area, and then starting to, okay, what's the blockages? What's stopping? What's getting in the way? Or how are you going about approaching this? And for some, and this is particularly in the case with depression, that idea of success is so far away that it's just no way I'm ever going to get anywhere near that. It becomes such an overwhelming thought that they abandon it immediately, because where they are and where they want to go is just an impossibility. And then even a small step, they kind of undermine. Oh, yeah, sure, you did that, but really, it was only getting out of bed. That kind of immediate kind of self-criticism comes in and undermines even just the littlest of behaviors. But yeah, often as we're trying to kind of do some action to get an individual perhaps engaged in the things that give them meaning, often we're looking at a number of different things. Firstly, just, emotional experience in terms of positive affect. Are they getting some kind of joy from it, if you will? One is a sense of like achievement or satisfaction that can come with that. And that's probably where success kind of comes in a little bit as well. And then the other key part is this kind of sense of mastery or self-efficacy. There's this kind of, yes, I can do it kind of feeling. And again, of course, there's success within that. And it might come as a result, but it isn't contingent on it.
Got it. So you're saying basically, instead of, so shifting the conversation away from, are you successful, yes or no binary, is how can you feel like you're more successful or that you're moving towards a life of more success? Like how can you
I would put it
feel?
the term success.
Just get rid of the term success. I get it. Okay, cool.
Well,
Well,
kind of talking more about, okay, what gives your life meaning? What would you
mm,
like to be doing? And then, of course, we can put a lot of judgment on ourselves with time. I must be achieving this by this time, and you'll hear a lot of people sort of talk about, there's my 5-year plan, 3-year plan. I have to have this done by tomorrow. If a client comes in, sometimes it's like, so you're dealing with a really difficult situation. What's your kind of future thinking? When would you like, when do you kind of think about it for yourself where things would get better? It's like, well, things should have gotten better 6 months ago. Like, right, okay.
right.
So we're working with that much time. So part of it is sometimes in order to have the success that you're talking about, is kind of just move that almost from the conversation.
Mm,
For me anyway. And the idea is, okay, well, let's just start small, and we're not looking. We're certainly looking at having some wins. Let's try and establish that. But success might actually mean a great deal of pain for you as well, emotionally. But we might not actually say that's successful. But it might mean you're coming into contact with a great deal of fear or things that we've been avoiding a great lot. A lot of time energy avoiding, but we're going to allow ourselves to come to contact with, which might mean other parts of my life are impacted.
yeah, right. In which case, um, I want to start trying to avoid using the word success, but I'm not going to avoid it. In which case, even basically like getting out of bed in the morning and then being able to recognize that you've done it and giving yourself a pat on the back, that's
Yeah,
already a success for a lot of people.
yeah, absolutely. And in fact, using the emotional high that comes from achievements can be really, really helpful, particularly with goal setting.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a researcher from Stanford named BJ Fogg who does a lot of work on how to implement habits that stick.
Mm-hmm.
And often it's using that kind of emotional high you get from kind of from achieving a goal, and then giving yourself a bit of an internal kind of celebration, whether that be like a little dance or a little woohoo kind of internally. But using that, he says, is absolutely critical to starting to get that behavior continuing, and not just be a one-off. I mean, there are certain things, of course, that you can be very kind of pragmatic and logical about with focus. Say you're running a marathon, or training for a half marathon, something like that. Um, you can, of course, set goals that are very clearly measurable, right? That you can track and follow, and experience feedback on. I felt less tired today from the run than I did a week ago,
Yep.
indicate that my cardiovascular fitness is going up. But when it comes to emotions and mood, it's not so straightforward as that. These aren't kind of clear, hard science numbers. And sometimes we can put an awful lot of pressure on ourselves to get the mood shift, which actually almost counterintuitively makes the mood uh, more heavy.
I hear you with that. So with pretty much all the work that we do with clients, we focus on like we don't know, we try and make sure that people are living more fulfilled lives, and it's very challenging to measure that with hard numbers, other than breaking down a whole bunch of different areas of one's life and then exploring out of 10 how satisfied are you with this area of life. But we find some funny things with that, right? Like for example, meditation mastermind is probably the best example. We take clients through like a 6-week journey to teach them meditation.
Yes, yeah.
I teach it with a friend of mine who was a monk for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And we measure before every session, we measure everyone's, like every week, we measure their life satisfaction level in all the different areas of their life. And it usually starts out at an okay kind of level. But then by the time you get to week 3 or week 4, and like you see the pre-work for the 4th week, everyone's satisfaction levels dropped off. And it's not huge. It's like 10% or 20% or something like that.
Yeah,
And when I see that, I get really excited because it means they're actually doing the work. They're putting in the effort to be able to go further. They're willing to run the risk of being a little bit less comfortable as a
yes.
result of wanting to get or wanting to achieve a greater intangible sense of emotional wellness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And at the end of it, it's always a whole lot higher, right? Um,
Well, yeah, definitely.
you'd hope so, yeah, sure. But I mean, that definitely speaks to exactly what you're talking about. It's really hard to measure it. So how do you do that with clients, but then also in a lot of your research towards compassion, something else which is intangible in terms of how you can actually measure it?
Yeah.
How do you measure people's progress in these intangible realms?
Yeah, I mean, we rely on a bunch of different things, don't we? So some are just your internal subjective experience, which is very real. Um, and we will ask on those scales of 1 to 10, how are you going? One can be also like, practice diaries or just behaviors, keeping account of what's happening there. Another could be you use more infrequently but at set times, these measures that we use that kind of tap into like a trait, an underlying trait. That's kind of we're trying to measure. That could be a mood, like depression, but a trait could also be something like, self compassion or something like that. Now, these things are very difficult to move and take time. And so it wouldn't be something that you would measure each session. It'd be something you'd look at measuring perhaps after a couple of months, if not longer. And it's like, okay, let's reflect, but let's take a moment here and pause and we'll measure and we'll compare how you've gone today compared to what you filled out 3 months ago. Now, memories are not particularly good at keeping track of that time and noticing that difference between what it was on this trait where I filled out maybe 20 items or something to what it is 3 months down the line. So that's a different type of measurement that's trying to get at something a little bit deeper than what it is right now. And of course, what it is right now is going to be heavily influenced by, you know, how you woke up that morning, whether or not you got the kid to school on time, traffic, what's happening on the news. It's very influenced by those kinds of things. Other things are physiological things. We can use physiological measure. So that's kind of trying to get beyond your subjective kind of experience and try to get a sense of what the body is saying. So, we've done some experiments with people who have body weight shame. And when they look at images of other bodies, they'll often say, particularly of themselves, they'll often say, yeah, I feel okay about myself, but their body feels highly threatened. So there's kind of this incongruence between what they're reporting and what their body is saying. And so what we're trying to do across time is trying to build a greater interoceptive awareness of what's happening within the body. And so that's more in coherence. So they are able to go, actually, that does threaten me. And your body's also feeling threatened. So they're more in attunement, more in alignment. So that's another one, is the physiology. Another one is also just hearing from someone else. So your partner, what's your partner say about your mood at home? You've been saying you're a delight to live with. But if I was to ask your partner, what would they say? Oh no, please don't ask her. Kind of the response. You can use like third party or observer kind of ways of measuring too, which sometimes can also be wonderful insights into what you're most focused and interested in success. You might feel like you're not doing a good job at all when it comes to your job. But then when it comes to, say, an appraisal, your supervisor might heap on a whole ton of praise, which can really give a sense of not only success, but of being valued and seen within the organization you work for, which is a tremendous feeling.
Unless, of course, you have that much judgment about yourself or you're that convinced that you're not doing a good job and they're like, oh, what do they want from me? Why are they lying to me? Why would they treat me this way?
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on.
Okay, well, why don't we take a step back? I'm keen to dive into the topic of compassion as well. But before we go there, I'm really curious about your journey.
Uh-huh.
And so I know you don't necessarily feel successful all the time, but if we consider that you've got a family that you're close to, kids that you spend a lot of time with, you've had patients that you've helped tremendously, and you've done a lot of research which has a lot of accolades and has helped benefit at least the academic world, but probably people who have read it as well. And if we bundle all of that together as some form of success, what have been the three most pivotal moments that have led you to where you are?
Yeah. God, that's a hard question, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, today, my answers for those three would probably be firstly, family. So
Mm.
I think that's a fairly common response, but not necessarily always, because some people have, you know, um, kind of risen through not particularly fortunate circumstances. But for me, there was always this sense of immediate support allowing me to take a risk, knowing that if it didn't pay off, it was okay. Um, the people around me would still love me, and so part of that enabled me to feel kind of this sense of, I suppose, safety to kind of pursue some things, and I pursued a couple of different things, not really knowing where I wanted to go, um, but always knowing that there was kind of like this sense of, take your time, we're here to support you, whatever that might be. There was no kind of predetermined outcome that they were putting on me on what my life should look like, or I guess what my successful life should look like, I suppose.
Was there a specific decision or like a specific moment where you needed to take action, and because you had that amazing family support, you chose different action to how you would have otherwise?
Yeah, I think there was a time where when I first started studying psychology, um, there was a lot of work on the brain and knowing the neuroanatomy of the brain. It's like, oh God, I don't want to have to learn all of these different features of the brain. I didn't think that's what it would be about necessarily. I knew it would be part of, but I didn't know we'd have to know all the regions in so much detail. And I remember, complaining to Dad about it. So that's the first thing. He was available. It wasn't dismissive, and I could talk about something that was impacting me. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily have that immediately at their immediate disposal or access. So I had that. And I remember we were outside. He was actually on the barbecue, and I was kind of whinging about that. And he made space for it to allow me to whinge. And then after that, I don't know exactly how the conversation meandered, but they just got to a point where he just said, "Well, I know you can do it. It's just a matter if you want to do it, but you can definitely do it, and it will take time. But all it does is require effort, and you can do it." And I think the way he said it with his tone, it kind of just instilled this real belief that, oh, maybe I can do it. So it could have just been I was more opening to hearing it that day. Maybe Dad had been saying it since I was 10. But this was a point where I was now pursuing something that I was really keen on. I was coming up against a significant hurdle. And then questioning, oh, do I really want to get to know all of this brain stuff? And him just to look at me and just say, I know you can do it, gave me an inner confidence that, okay, let's give this a go. I've now since done fMRI studies looking at compassion in the brain. So it's come a long way since, but that was one pivotal moment I really remember. The second one was when I saw the movie Good Will Hunting.
Mm.
So that movie, and I write about that in the book a little bit, actually, Good Will Hunting.
I loved hearing you write about it.
It was just, I just loved that movie so much. I didn't really know psychology was a profession in high school. So in high school, I was aware of kind of school counselors, but I wasn't aware of this career of being a psychologist. Um, I think at the school I went to, there was a lot of emphasis placed on your standard, stereotypical kind of professions of higher SES kind of backgrounds of doctors, lawyers, kind of business. And psychologists never featured in any of that kind of conversation. And perhaps being an all boys school too, there was emotions and feelings aren't something necessarily, they should be, but aren't necessarily at the forefront. So I just wasn't aware of this degree. And then I saw the movie, just rocks my world. I was like, oh my God, Robin Williams, you're amazing. just loved how he was able to connect with Matt Damon's character. was like, oh God, I wouldn't mind doing that. I've got three younger siblings, a sister and two brothers, um, and I've just always been able to kind of connect relatively easily, regardless of where I was at, in sport, outside of sport, with people younger, older, and the idea of being able to connect as a job in psychology just really spoke to me. And so watching that movie had a really profound impact. So Dad, when I was kind of questioning my abilities, is one. Two would definitely be seeing the movie Good Will Hunting. I think the third would probably um, be meeting and starting my friendship with Paul Gilbert, who founded sort of compassion focused therapy. Um, when you have conversations with him, they're always kind of filtered with playfulness and fun. And it's kind of like we're just kind of in a sandpit, throwing around ideas. Some of the structures we make collapse completely, but others are like, oh, that's fantastic. And it's just through this kind of organic kind of discussion that a new research idea will emerge, and we'll be like, yeah, let's go for that. And so he gave me a lot of encouragement and offered me a wonderful sounding board because when I was over in Stanford in 2016, just the way the time zones were, Paul and I, because Paul's in England and I was in Palo Alto, right near San Francisco, and I'd always every day have about an hour and a half conversation with him for about 5 months, and it was just amazing. His generosity of time to do that with me really helped, sow the seeds in a really powerful way. So, I mean, the investment of others has been huge, in me.
Yeah, I can sense that. Your dad and Dr. Paul Gilbert as well. Amazing.
Yeah.
And even movies can provide forms of mentorship as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was in tears with the whole when Skylar and Will broke up, and it was just like, oh, that movie was intense. I loved it.
Yeah, I did like that movie. We had a team, like a bit of a team fun thing which we do every week, where one member of the team comes up with a bunch of questions for everyone to ask them, for everyone to answer. And one of the questions was, if you could play the role, as in like go back and play the role in any movie of any particular character, who would it be? And most people are thinking like, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible or whatever. No, I'm like, I'll take Sean in Good Will Hunting. I'll dive straight into that, of course. And someone's like, wow, my business partner was like, wow, that's a deep role to play. I said, yeah, but imagine how much you'd learn from trying to take on that character.
But I mean,
Crazy.
well, I completely agree with you. But you're doing that now, right, as well in your role, in your job right now.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, there are definitely elements of it. I'd say I'm definitely not a psychologist,
Okay.
although some clients will tend to think that I am.
Yeah. Sure.
It ends up in those types of conversations.
Yeah,
It's like, man, I've seen a psychologist for 10 years and they've never discussed this with me. How have they never discussed this with me? I said, oh no, they didn't feel confident to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm not really speaking to clients going, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Going to that depth is pretty crazy. I think the most psychologists would actually be fearful of diving into that part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean that's it. One of the the not my fault element was also a big part of compassion focused therapy, and I think that is kind of like it almost felt like there was this fate. I'm not religious or anything, but it almost felt like there was this divine kind of entity having an influence on my life. Where Good Will Hunting was just my favorite movie, and that not my fault scene just kind of immediately evokes emotion. But Paul, in the first workshop I saw him give on compassion-focused therapy in Byron Bay in Australia back in, I think it was 2013, maybe it was 2014, can't remember, one of those years. He spoke a lot about, how children were being raised and in some conditions, where they'd been really harshly criticised or hit, and so on. And when working with them in therapy, sort of, this idea that, you didn't choose that. That's not your fault. He said a lot. And he also speaks a lot about how emotionally we experience these things like anxiety or anger. He says, that's not your fault either. You did not choose to be a human born with the capacity to feel anxiety or anger. That's just part of it, and that's not your fault. And then this whole idea of you've got a mind that can project into the future and catastrophize, but also ruminate. It's amazing you can do that. That's not your fault that it does that. It's just how it works, being part of being a human being. And so then I went to dinner with him that night. I said, oh, Paul, I loved today's day of the workshop. We had 2 more days to go. I'm like, have you seen this movie called Good Will Hunting? This movie is amazing. And he was, of course, yes. And then the next day he played like 5 snippets from the movie. So I was like, okay, wow, this movie got me into psychology. And I love compassion-focused therapy as an approach. And now here Paul is talking about a lot of what we're trying to do therapeutically. He kind of illustrates with some of the clips from Good Will Hunting. It was just amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a nice segue into why compassion and what is compassion. But just before we went there, just like what you're talking about there, as when you were a child, your dad, it's not your fault that your dad or your mum had emotional outbursts. I think that a lot of parents probably need to hear that message as well. It's not your fault that your child has emotional outbursts. It doesn't make you a bad parent if your child has emotional outbursts.
I could not agree with you more. It's amazing. Some parents put this intense pressure on themselves. And a lot of my work has looked at applying compassion focus in a parenting context. They've got this immense pressure on themselves that they have to get things right all of the time. And particularly if they're out in public, if the kid's having a meltdown and they don't know how to respond to it immediately, there's this kind of experience that I'm seen as a bad parent. And it's kind of like, often most people are kind of sympathetic to the cause, like, oh God, yeah, no, it's tricky when they're out at the shops. And of course the shops don't make it easy for parents because, all the candies at eyesight for them and all this kind of business, and all the waiting and checkouts, it's all the play and distraction for them. But yeah, no, it's and also this idea that for many parents, it's been a long time between being around kids a lot and then being a parent with your own kids. Like in one program that we run, we ask the parents to reflect on, before becoming a parent, how much time were you spending with kids? Were you spending daily time, weekly time? And for many, it would be like maybe monthly, a little bit, not daily, together all of the time, which is what it is like when you are an actual parent. You don't get a day off. Yet there's this sense that you just got to know what to do. I don't know how to settle and what's wrong with me and so on. But there, some parents think like that the child should be ready to do certain things where developmentally that's still a couple of years off. And so that's the real difficulty. It's kind of like they're not doing it yet. It's like, well, developmentally, this ain't going to come in for another year or two.
But so-and-so's child is able to do it.
Oh, the social comparison straight up, right? But so-and-so. And it's like, well, sometimes with that kind of response, it is kind of like, well, what's the comparison? Is it a useful comparison for you? Like sometimes I compare myself when I first started CFT to Paul. Now, Paul developed the bloody therapy 40 years ago before I was born. There's not a comparison. Completely unrealistic comparison. Oh my God, Paul would be doing this better. Well, of course he would be. He developed it. He's got 40 years. Albert Ellis, he did a lot of work with rational, emotional sort of behavior therapy, talks a lot about if there's anything you're wanting to pursue, it's important that you are comfortable with doing badly at it. You know, if you can't perform badly at it and you can't feel okay with that, don't pursue it.
Right. And now I'm entirely with you here. 100% with you. I think the challenge that a lot of people who are listening to this will be having with hearing this part of the conversation is they might have even just heard you say that, when you were just starting out and you're comparing yourself with literally the person who created the damn thing before you're born. But they'll probably be hearing that saying, yeah, but you put really high standards on yourself. And because of that, you would have pursued it really strongly and you would have gotten better as a result. If you were more less critical of yourself, then maybe you wouldn't have achieved as much.
Yeah,
What would you,
that's
what,
the bit.
so
Yeah,
what would you share with someone?
if I dropped my self-criticism, I would expect mediocrity. And of course, it couldn't be further from the truth.
Okay, so tell me why.
Well, there's a lot in that. And so, I mean, sometimes as an example, I talk about, I can use my dad because I've already said that one, and that's something new. Um, when I came out and told dad, like I was having a setback, right? So I was having a setback with the studying. I wasn't, particularly enjoying it. It was frustrating. Um, and so I was complaining to him about it. Now, he could have come in with some criticism there easily. Shut up. Bloody whinging about doing something. Like, yeah, how lucky you are to be at a university. Yeah, how lucky you are to be able to pursue something that you kind of would like that actually isn't going to be that profitable for you either. But how lucky you are that we're willing to support this. Just pull your socks up and get back into it, he could have said in a kind of really critical way. But he didn't. Instead, he kind of listened. And then he offered words of encouragement. So the listening helped validate that my concerns or my pains were real. So you didn't feel dismissed. But then he came in with the encouragement by saying, "Oh no, I think you can do it. You can do it." And hearing that someone believes in you is a great motivator to then go and have a crack, as opposed to being kind of yelled at and berated, which he could have done. Now, some might argue, well, the yelling and the berating may have helped you get back into it that instance. When we slow it down and you kind of allow space to feel that come in the brain, what happens when that criticism comes in like that, with that hostility, it lights up your amygdala, which is a threat response in the brain region. It also lights up your anterior cingulate and insula, which are also pain receptors. And it doesn't open up. It kind of closed down because you become now threatened in a pain state. And it doesn't open up the perspective taking or the kind of a lot of that kind of prefrontal cortex region, which is really helpful for open thinking, which is really important when you're studying. And so the idea here is if you come in with the criticism, it shuts down the kind of openness of you engaging, makes it a threat and a pain focus, and it amplifies the pain. So you're already experiencing setback, and then on top of that, it amplifies it and makes it even more painful. And then physiologically, it impacts the regulatory activity that you become more sympathetically aroused, which again is the kind of pressure kind of pulsating. And then that kind of puts a lot of focus on having immediate sort of success or outcome in order to balance that kind of negative threat kind of experience into a balanced kind of level playing field, because I've now had the success or the win and I feel good. So a lot will play that game where if I've got a negative, it balances if I have an opposing positive experience, and it kind of levels it out. A lot of the time, though, that success isn't experienced for a long time, right? So I don't know if my studying's actually paid off until the end of the semester when it comes to understanding the kind of the brain functioning. But I can put myself through the ringer, as it were, with this kind of criticism, trying to avoid a fear. right? So you're kind of pursuing something to avoid a fear. We would argue that's probably not the best way to engage in the material. But there is another way that you can keep yourself encouraged and motivated when experiencing a setback or disappointment or failure. And that's with validating whatever the setback failure was, but then offering that encouragement, which is a different way of relating to oneself. We would argue with a compassionate orientation, one where you're focused on not only trying to make the person feel reassured, but also giving them this kind of inner confidence that they can approach it and can do it. And then across time, that tends to be a lot more helpful.
And so what does that entail? Is that primarily focusing on your positives, validating the areas which you need to work on, and then encouraging yourself to do more of it? Or is there something more to it?
It can, well, a lot of the approach relies on those fears, blocks, and resistances that come up that you mentioned. And so it can involve, to wonder exactly what you're saying. So when you're experiencing the disappointment, okay, let's get a sense of what is the disappointment? How is it you're feeling? Start to validate that experience. Yes, absolutely makes sense that you feel really upset about this and angry about this. And then it's starting to think about, in terms of what it is that you'd like to be doing that would be helpful. It's kind of like, well, let's focus in on what you have been doing that's even got you here, reminding you of the skills that you've got. So a lot of people forget the skills that they've got in those moments of setback and failure. I'm useless. Well, no, you're not. You've got this behind you. You just remind yourself you've got this talent within, and also you've got these skills to pursue. You've got that in you, and kind of just getting a sense of what words would be useful for you to hear at this point. And sometimes it's not any words in particular that immediately stand out. But what we can do within the mind is imagine if you had an ideal, compassionate other supporting you. How would they feel towards you at this time? Uh, how would they like to act towards you? And sometimes those people would say um, they would feel towards me a sense of sympathy and empathy, and they would feel and see that I'm trying my hardest, and they would offer a hand around my shoulder, and that's enough. It doesn't even have to get to us. Okay, well, imagining that is enough to allow them to correct their ship and then study again, or do whatever it is that they need to. But for others, it is the words do really mean something. So, but the words don't come immediately. So you try the words, and it might be something cliched like, remember your strengths, and you're like, okay, well, let's say that to ourselves. So imagine it's just happened. We'll slow down. Let's say this one internally for yourself. Remember your strengths. Did that work for you? Did that emotionally connect? And sometimes I'll say, yes, that did. But it'll be like, nah, that's not really doing it. It's like, okay, well, let's change it. What would you think you need to hear at that time that could be more useful? And so we had some compassionate phrases for a mother who was having real difficulty with her kiddo. She had a lot of anxiety and was trying to control a lot of their kid's behaviour. Was really afraid of what the kid might say or do when around others. And so it's kind of like the first phrases that we used were just your classics, kind of like, may you be safe, may you be peaceful, kind of offering those wishes to a child. But they really didn't work. So we spent some time, and eventually she came up with these most incredible phrases that were unique directly to her and her experience when with her child of, may I allow you the chances to learn for yourself. May I offer the support when you need it, when you do have a setback. And it was like, it was great, totally reoriented, but they were hers, right? And they were emotionally meaningful to her because they were connected to exactly the experience that she was having. But that took some time. Like, they don't immediately come easily. Sometimes when you're trying to establish this compassionate relating, we rely on a few cliches. Equally, you could say, if your friend was going through that exact experience, what would you say to them? And then that's a nice way for them to start generating. And then it's like, okay, well, let's offer those things to you. How would you feel about that? And then there can be the sense, oh no, I can't. It's like, okay, well, what makes you offer it to your friend but not yourself? What's that about, do you think? And then that's a whole topic of interesting conversation.
Yeah, okay. And so if we're thinking back to the example of a parent whose kid's having a meltdown in the middle of a shopping center, I think that was the example we unofficially alluded to. And they're really in a fear-based state. Their sympathetic nervous system's going haywire. They're in fight or flight. They're worried about all these other people. They're parenting with an audience, right? There are all these other people around them who are watching them, who are like watching the kids have a meltdown, and of course the parent is judging themselves, going, "Oh no, what are all these people thinking?" And that just must be so annoying. And they're in this, and they keep finding themselves in this type of state.
Mm.
And if it's not seen to, then I guess the outcome is either they're going to just keep judging themselves all the time, or they're going to feel more distance from their child, or they'll end up just never leaving the house, and that probably makes things even worse. But if we consider that someone's like this, I think that most parents, at least in our society, who I know, will tend to be really fearful of parenting with an audience.
Oh yeah.
I don't quite understand it that much, but I understand it enough to be able to empathize that people experience it. And I mean, how can is compassion the answer to that?
Yeah. Oh, listen, that's like a multi-layered kind of response. I mean, part of it is we often don't set up even environments to make them suited for kids
Right.
to live in and play in. You just have to look at some of the environments we go into with our kids, and there's just nothing there for them. It's damn bland. And so then we get upset because they start, making noise or playing with things that shouldn't be played with. It's like, but what else do you expect them to do? Like, there's nothing else there for them to play with. So part of it, are we creating environments which are sympathetic and aware of children? I mean, where I live, there was this nature strip, which is pretty decent size, which they took submissions for what to do with the land, and they all wanted to turn it into a kids' playground. The kids' playground that they built is just one kind of metal base that goes up with a rope with one big swing on it. That is it.
Wow.
I have seen no kids in that playground because whoever designed it clearly had never been with kids. It's kind of like this is so boring for them. They can only do one thing, and that's sit on it, and it just goes. And they need someone else to push it. You can't even generate your own momentum for it. But you see these swings everywhere, and it's almost as if the underlying motive of the council is, well, we don't want kids in this space. We just want the park to be vacant, and so they designed that. So part is, are there good environments for kids? And often there's not. So you take the kid to the shops, there's often not the ideal environment to keep them engaged and interested, let alone on a plane, let alone on other forms of public transport, or at work, at offices and so on. So that's a big one. So one thing you could do is start to put more time into considering, how can I make the situation I'm taking my child, which isn't particularly interesting for them, because they don't want to go, but I'm bringing them. So what time could I spend in advance trying to prepare some activities that I know will keep them engaged and interested. And if things start to go a little bit haywire, what can I do in order to help that situation? So part of it is kind of coming up with a bit of preparation that you can use across settings. So you might have a bit of a shopping routine that you can use with your kiddo, but then the idea is, okay, that worked at the shops. Can I extend that to when we visit Nana and Pa's? Or can I use that when we go to dinner? Or do some slight modifications have to be made? And the next one, though, is, yes, I 100% believe if you're going in with a compassionate focus, what happens then when the child is having a tantrum? And tantrum is probably not a very nice word to be using, but if the child's having a breakdown, a compassion focus puts the focus on the child. They are suffering. What can I do that would actually be of help with their suffering right now? Whereas the former way of thinking, it's kind of all about almost me, 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 me. How am I seen? What do people think of me? Yes, I'm making a racket here. It's, you know, my child. And then all of a sudden, the attentional focus is on you, and there's this urgency to correct it immediately. But really, with when a kiddo's in that kind of state out shopping, there is no quick fix.
No.
You know, and it's just like, how are you at tolerating that uncomfortability? And that becomes part of it. So part of the work that we would do is, how do you start to tolerate this and recognize that, yeah, it's super uncomfortable and no one would choose it, but you can tolerate it. And then after 10 minutes, things are settled down again and you reset. A lot of the work we do with the compassion focus is about the reset, right? Can you reset after you've experienced the pain? Can you reset and connect again in a positive way? For many, there's almost no reset or repair. There's kind of like broken down. If it's broken down, you're now in that stimulated situation yourself physiologically and threat focused. So you're regulating a threat with a threat, your own threat, and then you kind of, you know, perhaps yell or scream or threaten your kid. If you don't do this, we won't be coming. You know, we've all done that kind of stuff, which often can just amplify the difficulty or the pain. And then the judgment even becomes twofold. And now they've seen me yell at my kid. You know, that kind of part commences. And then after, it's like silence. You know, you'll go to your room when I get home, or, you know, a removal of something that was a positive in the child's life has occurred. You know, okay, you're not going to be able to play this when you get home. Something like this. And there's a separation. Whereas what we're ideally wanting is after that difficulty's occurred, and it's been painful for both parent and child, can you reconnect? Can you lay down a memory of emotional warmth here? And that will help both reconnect and crack on again.
And so I think what you raised there is really important. We often can't control the circumstances, right? Like you can't control the weather. You can bring an umbrella, but you can't control the weather, right?
Yeah.
But then other than that, you got to be able to work on yourself first to be able to self-regulate before you can try and co-regulate with your child.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. You know, I definitely agree. There is a degree of that. Part of it is remembering, and sometimes we talk about, you know, sometimes when this occurs, we can get into a fight-flight parenting situation, right? So there's the threat, and you're engaging in a fight-flight. Okay, let's get the hell out of here, or you start yelling or threatening the kid, and neither of those are particularly useful.
No.
So one of the things is we can do things to improve your body's physiological activity and systems. We can strengthen it, and you can strengthen it with compassion training. So when that stress comes in, your parasympathetic system, which is a really important physiological regulator for threat, doesn't drop out immediately. It can help be there to help you be able to engage in ways that are more in line with what you value as a parenting approach, knowing that there isn't a quick fix. So you immediately take that pressure off, and you're able to be there and be more warm. That doesn't mean that you take delight in the tantrum, but it means you are able to tolerate it and be more calm and composed and sympathetic to the fact that this is all they've got. Children rely heavily on external regulation. They're not built with their internal regulating, so they need us to do it for them. So usually, like in that kind of context with a parent-child, that's when parenting is when we have to actually parent. You know, parenting when you're sitting down reading, having fun, that's just the fun of it, right? You know, it's kind of relatively easy. It comes, they want to engage with you, they want to play with you. It's still really important stuff, but not as difficult or as painful. But kids really need us turned on at our best when they're experiencing their worst. But it's often stressful for us.
I remember once, literally, my daughter, she must have been about 2 at the time. I was at the shopping with her, and she had what are we calling it? A breakdown. not tantrum, breakdown. Um, and I just simply sat down, like she was throwing herself on the floor, and I just moved the shopping trolley to the side, and I just sit down with her, next to her, and literally just sit down right there. I said, whenever you're ready, I'm right here. I can give you a cuddle. I can make you laugh. I can tickle you. I can pick you up and put you in the trolley, or we can go very soon. Whatever. But as soon as you're done, know that I'm right here. I just sat down, and of course, there are all of the fears going through my head of I'm going to be blocking half of the aisle. Other people are going to be like, "What the hell are you doing?" I might be in the way of other people who might want to access the stuff behind me. I'm like, you know what? None of that really matters that much right now. My daughter matters more. And so I sat down with her, and sure enough, after a few minutes, she came to me and she sat on my lap. And then after a few minutes, I said, are you ready to go? Like, are you ready to get up and keep going? We can explore somewhere else. It'll be lots of fun. And then she's like, not yet, Daddy. I said, okay. How about I ask you again another 10 seconds, please? And then she was happy to go. And it was all good. And we connected. And it was quite beautiful. But I don't think I would have been able to do that if I couldn't self-regulate in that moment.
Yeah.
I don't think there would have been a chance to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky. So that's like an in the moment kind of stressor. And what you did there was awesome, like honestly, and very courageous. And that's at the heart of compassion. At the heart of compassion is courage, because you mentioned that there are a lot of fears there. You know, people looking at me, blocking the aisle, all this kind of stuff, the time pressure and stuff. So it was courageous to go, no, my daughter's most important here. She's the one who's suffering.
The fear of being a terrible dad probably outweighed all the rest of it. So I was really just succumbing to the greater fear. Let's leave it at that.
That's it. But it takes courage to turn towards and sit with. Often when you hear a threat call or an upset call like that in the wild with nature, that's a sign to scatter, get the hell out of here. Something is dangerous. There's a threat, and so they do get out of there. But humans, the way we kind of work, when you hear that threat, people will, if you're close to them, for the most part, will turn towards and move towards and approach it. There would be other adults there who would not approach that suffering child. They would just see them as being a nuisance, and they would move away. And of course, that's not particularly compassionate. So compassion, firstly, recognizing the signal and then moving towards, which is exactly what you did. And then trying to do some actions that will help at that point, which is an amazing demonstration of the courage and wisdom aspects of compassion. Now, what was your question?
Well, wait, there wasn't.
The next part.
I think it was still about self-regulation. I think
self-regulation. Now, if it is a depressed person I'm working on, so it's not an immediate situation like that's occurred. This has been something they're living with, have been living with, say, for months. One thing that we might try to do is get them out of their own mind to focus on helping another. Right? Because part of the damage of depression is being too caught up in one's own mind. It's not their fault, it's just how depression plays out. But there's often this heavy weight and self-loathing that can often go with depression. So getting out of the mind and going, okay, let's focus on something you can do for another person. They then get some interpersonal contact, and depression's a great isolator. It brings a lot of loneliness and withdrawal. So that immediately connects them with another person. And then there's a value element of I've contributed meaningfully to helping someone else, which immediately comes with a sort of like a warm glow kind of experience as well, because you have been helpful to another. And feeling like you have been of help, I think, is a fundamental desire, motivation for humans. We often see when people come up to retirement, there's this sense of I can no longer contribute, I can no longer be of help. So there's this part of us that still desperately wants to feel like we can be of some help, contribute in some way. So sometimes with depression, actually, what you get them is away from self completely. It's just like, well, let's focus on you doing something else to expand your world. And if it's the child, obviously they haven't built that sort of self-regulatory capacity. So they rely completely on receiving that regulation from you as the parents. So as a parent, there's a lot of pressure to be able to be there and attuned to what's happening around you, which means sort of being able to tolerate a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think something relevant to this topic as well. I was quite pleased to read quite a bit about meditation in your book and about your approach towards it. Do you want to share about how you use meditation as a tool to help people become more compassionate, or at least some of the links you found in research?
Yeah, there are many ways to kind of cultivate compassion. One is through sort of meditation or imagery. I mean, part of it is some people go in to do meditation very seriously. And so like they, and part of it is because I need to get to this immediate outcome, of being more zen.
Yeah, I need to be more zen. I need to have less thoughts. Stop thinking. Stop thinking. Wait, what's saying that? Stop thinking. Damn it. It's not working.
Exactly, which is, of course, completely undermines
yes.
the whole process of meditation. But, often meditation is used to help with our reactions to pain. And this is sometimes referred to as the sutra of the two arrows. So the first arrow is, of course, the fact that as we are life, that life involves pain. So we've got that pain that's built in. The second arrow is then our reactions to that pain. So you can't shift the pain, but you can shift the way you start to relate to the pain. And meditation can be one way of helping that. And Jon Kabat-Zinn brought in this approach of meditation, specifically a form of meditation called mindfulness, to help with those with chronic pain. Because often when you have pain, your whole attention becomes very acute and focused on the pain, which then shuts down like engagement with everything else in life. As you're attending to the pain. And so your second arrow is then all the frustration and anger of not getting over the chronic pain because it's chronic. And so his idea was, well, we can work with that second arrow. We can't shift the chronic pain, but we can shift the way you're relating to your pain with mindfulness. And so part of engaging in mindfulness is not only recognizing that mindfulness is a process of coming back to the present moment. So it's always just trying to reconnect you back to what it is that's going on. So Thich Nhat Hanh would refer to mindfulness as a state of remembering, just remembering to come back. So the idea is remembering to come back, but as you're doing that, doing it with a friendliness to yourself, rather than, oh God, I was drifting again. Why can't I do this? Which obviously just makes it worse. Buddhist monk Matthew Ricard, in his book Altruism, kind of discusses mindfulness should never just be called mindfulness. It should be called caring mindfulness, because the way you want to do mindfulness is with this caring or compassionate gentleness, that when you notice the mind drift, you're able to bring it back with a friendly, okay, and just bringing it back to the breath, a friendly inner tone, a friendly relating style to help you stay anchored in whatever it is that you are staying anchored on, which is often the breath.
Yeah, look, that makes perfect sense, and it does answer the question. And are those the key ways that you found that meditation helps people become more compassionate, or are there any other ways as well?
Yeah. So I mean, that's a way of coming into contact with the present moment. Now, meditation, you can, there's lots of different forms of meditation. One aspect of meditation is becoming more familiar with your mind. And so mindfulness can help with that, becoming more familiar with where my mind drifts to, where it goes to, kind of what are the natural patterns of my mind state. So it's becoming more familiar with your mind. And then the second part of meditation is you can then on purpose start to choose a certain mind to cultivate. And one mind that you could choose to cultivate is a compassionate mind. So if you're going to create this sort of compassionate mind, the idea is then sort of focusing in on this idea of how can I be sensitive to suffering in self and others, and then have this kind of a commitment to try and alleviate and prevent it. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so we sometimes distill it to how can I be helpful rather than hurtful or harmful. So in that kind of more distilled kind of connecting to the mantra. But there are a number of ways you can do this. So there's the ideal compassionate other exercise that you can do, that I've talked briefly about. But another is you can sort of imagine yourself as this ideal compassionate other. And then as this ideal compassionate other, what we ask people to imagine is, imagine if you've got this wisdom, strength, and commitment to address your suffering and be of help. And then from this position, you're now in a compassionate mind state, which is obviously ideally what we're wanting. But you just don't stay there. You then have to do something with that mind state in order to address suffering. So after we're in this mind state, we look at progressing it further by saying, okay, now that you're here, imagine that you're dealing with the self-criticism or stress or suffering that you're experiencing. See that part of you that's experiencing that? What would your compassionate part of you offer? That part of you that's struggling and is suffering with the distress. What would you say? How would you feel towards them? What would you like to do? And that is then rehearsing how you might compassionately relate to yourself. And we think that's the most important part to focus in on when you're doing imagery. Not so much getting to the compassionate state, although that's absolutely fundamental. If you don't do that, you can't get to that part. But the part is you're then rehearsing with imagery how you would relate to your distress. And that we see as being the most important, because then you're actually putting your compassion to work, and you're putting your compassion to work to address your suffering.
Right. So this is obviously, well, I'm guessing this is where you start talking about active compassion rather than passive compassion. But is that all it is? Is it like the things that you say to yourself? Or are there, like, I understood the active compassion as what you then physically do differently as a result. But is this like a step towards it? Or is that the active compassion as well?
Well,
like
I mean,
things you say.
You're taking a different perspective where you're wishing internally to self, because you're the object of the compassion that you're trying to target. How would you start to interrelate? And that would be different to, say, automatic pilot, or just passively, I hope for more compassion in my life. So you can passively just wish for more compassion to exist in your life. That would be a passive kind of way of engaging with compassion. Just sitting with the intention, wouldn't it be nice to be compassionate? And wouldn't it be nice to live in a world that's compassionate? Whereas the active is then taking steps to allow that. So one is internally within your mind, you could actually, what would I say? How would I feel? And what would I like to be doing when I am in that state? And that's like a first kind of way of then imagining. A second, or there are multiple strings to this bow, but then it could be actual doing things. So, what behaviours could one be doing that could help alleviate that distress you're having at that moment? And one behaviour might be, well, I would like to connect and talk to someone about it, perhaps my parenting partner. Okay, well, your compassionate self might say, hey, you know what could be really useful right now? Go talk to your partner. And so then the step would be talking to partner is one compassionate behavior you could take. So the idea here is there's not one compassionate behavior. So when it comes to suffering, there are millions of compassionate possibilities. And often it will rely on what you can enact at that moment. So what kind of skills do you have that could address it? And sometimes that skill might be recognizing I haven't got the skills, so I'll turn to another. And that could be a partner, or I might go see a coach, or I might go see my psychologist, or even book an appointment to possibly see a psychologist. That's wisdom, right? And that's getting you to take steps in a way to help address your suffering. It might not immediately reduce it, but it's along the path to reducing it. But then there are other things you do as well.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I guess there are all of the physical things you can do and the different types of habits and the looking after your body and eating the right way and doing some exercise in the morning and all those stuff. Even practicing meditation is a way of, I guess, in a way, then practicing compassion or actively creating a more compassionate world for you, at least the world you view in your lens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fantastic.
But something which I don't think I saw too much of in your book, maybe it's because I haven't read all the chapters yet, but I suspect that there's a lot of people who get frustrated by other people being less compassionate to them. We've spoken a lot about cultivating compassion in our own lives and for ourselves.
Yeah.
and so that we can become more compassionate to the people we care about.
Yeah.
But what advice would you give to someone who's frustrated by others being less compassionate towards them? And whether that's their kids are less compassionate towards them, or probably more often would be like their partner is less compassionate towards them.
Yeah.
What what have you done in terms of study and research on this? And what advice would you give to people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a couple of components to that. I mean, the first is compassion can be given outwards. You can also give yourself compassion, but how are you at receiving compassion from other people? And sometimes we're not particularly good at even recognizing that people are being compassionate towards you. Sometimes you've just missed that completely. And in fact, people have been compassionate to you a lot. You just haven't noticed or recognized it. So there's been one study done with married couples, newly married couples, and they were asked to rate whether or not they were compassionate to their partner during the day, or whether or not their partner had been
I like where this is going.
compassionate towards them. And they also got them to rate their level of negative and positive emotional experience during that day. And what was really interesting, and they were looking at obviously hits. Hits were when both parties recognized I had acted compassionately and I had received compassion from my partner. That would be a hit. Like a miss would be I acted compassionately towards you, Harry, but you didn't notice that you were compassionate back. Not back to me. You didn't recognize that I'd been compassionate to you, I should say. Does that make sense? And so I would say, yes, I was compassionate, but you would say, oh, James hasn't been compassionate to me today. Mm-hmm. That would be the idea of a miss. And so that would be the idea of a miss. What's really interesting there is, so I've recognized I've been compassionate towards you. You haven't recognized that I've actually been compassionate to you. You've missed noticing that. But what they found in this experiment is even on those days where you've missed it, you still felt less negative emotions than on the days when I said I didn't give compassion to you and you didn't see me give compassion to you. So even when we don't kind of recognize it and can state, yes, they were compassionate to me, yes or no, emotionally, we've experienced the benefit of what compassion's about, which is trying to alleviate suffering. So that's what their conclusions were. So obviously hits are the best when you both see it. But even when it's a miss, the target still feels less suffering that day. They report less suffering those days than on the days where both report misses. Suffering would be more up. So sometimes when we are struggling or upset, we see through a certain lens, right? We see just the oneness of the pain or the difficulty. And then all of the people around us, what have they done to help with that oneness, and of which is our pain, which means we might have in darkness a whole host of different things that we just haven't recognized as that's them doing something minor in their day in order to help us because they've seen us struggle. It might not immediately address the significant pain, but they might be doing little things that we just have totally not seen and are in the darkness. So compassion would obviously then help open up the oneness to see the two-ness or the three-ness, four-ness in the situations and seeing that there are people out there who have done little bits to try to help. The other part is, and I do talk about this in the chapter on compassion contradictions, is this sense that it's not our job to monitor what other people choose to do, right? So that's outside of your control. You can choose to be compassionate towards them, and you might hope in that relationship that they were compassionate towards you at the times you needed it. And if they aren't, well, that would be something then to talk to them about, at some point, trying to find an opportunity to have a constructive conversation about in this relationship. And even after those efforts, you notice no change, well, then you've got an opportunity of what you'd like to do in that relationship, in order to maybe, okay, this is a relationship I'm not going to invest much in now, because I've kind of been putting stuff in, but it hasn't been coming back. So maybe this isn't the friendship that I thought it was.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, because I think this is a important topic. Yes, we need to be more compassionate to ourselves, but you're saying that one way we can be more compassionate to ourselves is being both less frustrated by other people providing less compassion? And secondly, be more open to seeing the compassion that others are providing, when we often kind of gloss over it or ignore it because we have negativity bias, right?
Oh, total negativity bias, and you often only see it through a very narrow lens. And so, there are days you're just not aware that some people have done things, like
Mm,
perhaps not put an extra task on you. They're like, okay, I'll do this for them because I can see that they're suffering. Now,
mm,
you don't know because you haven't seen it, perhaps. Um, but perhaps also, you've come home and they've seen you upset and they've given you a bit more space. There could be all of these minor behaviors that are occurring in order to try to be compassionate towards you. You just haven't noticed. But the idea of compassion is not to keep score. So
mm,
there's no sort of moral high ground to take when it comes to being compassionate. It's just positive summing. Any compassion is a good thing. Um, and ultimately, if you're being compassionate, the research shows that that's contagious. So if you're
mm,
compassionate, it's much more likely the next person is going to be compassionate in their circle or social network. So the idea is it is contagious, it will be picked up. And if we see someone do it, we tend to model it. So modeling is also a big part of it. And so, of course, though, that doesn't mean we receive it from everyone that we'd want it to. So there is on the individual level, that's something that I might be able to address by talking to that person.
mm,
Sort of, hey, I was really hurting there. Where the hell were you? And then they might say, I was there. I called you several times. Did you not see my missed calls? Oh, I'm so sorry I missed them. Or
mm,
it could be, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. In fact, my wife's going through this and I just haven't been able. And then it's like, oh, okay. So there's more benefit of the doubt and you understand more about the different perspectives. So those things can happen. But there can also be on the level of what am I receiving from the people within my family or a group of people? It could be government, could be country. What are they doing for me? And so, politics are kind of really geared up on this. What group can I cater to the most in order to kind of win, if you will? And so, compassion can be from others coming down to you, so like government, organizational. It can be on the level of individual, but it can also be, as you kind of intimated too, children or people, say employees, below us, if you will, being compassionate towards you as well. And there's no optimum. It's just a case of ideally what we'd like to have happen is that you're experiencing some going out, some coming in, and some self compassion.
mm. So is it self-compassionate to fill your own cup more than rather than relying on others? Uh, or is it self-compassion surrounding yourself with people who are more compassionate towards you or more caring?
Well,
Or is it
it's compassion, isn't it?
it's
So,
self-compassion?
and these things are highly overlapping. But it is a case of okay, compassion is about being sensitive to self and others with their suffering, and we know being compassionate to others will alleviate some of your own personal distress, even
Mm,
if it's not your distress that you're helping with. But
mm,
we know when we're being compassionate to others, this makes us feel higher levels of well-being and less stress ourselves. Um, Not to the same degree as if it's us receiving it immediately from someone or being self-compassionate. Um,
or at
but
least recognizing that's being provided, right? Recognizing that
I
we are receiving.
mean, you don't even have to recognize it to benefit. That's the
Right.
whole thing, right? I don't often go about my day thinking to myself, isn't it amazing that I live in a city which offers me free healthcare?
Mm,
That's an amazingly compassionate gesture that we've instilled in society as something to be valued. But I don't often think about it on a day to day. I kind of, it's in many ways take it for granted
mm,
until I need it, or until it's not there because I'm somewhere else and you don't have access to it. Um, so yeah, it is a sense of sometimes what can be really useful is engaging with this idea of where have I seen compassion today, and sometimes noticing that can be a great encourager for oneself to be inspired and be compassionate yourself. But I think the key is not policing other people.
mm. I think that's a very powerful message to be able to share. There was a frame or a perspective. I think it was Tony Robbins, where he said he had this firm belief that all human behavior is driven by positive intent. All human behavior driven by positive intent, whether that be you or your spouse or your kids or Stalin or Hitler. All human behavior was driven by positive intent and a desire to feel loved. Whether they've done it in an effective way or not is an entirely different story.
Well, I mean, this
I
is part of the wisdom part. Like, we say compassion includes two parts. First, recognizing suffering, but then taking wise action, not just any kind of action. So, the river's just behind me here. If I was to see you, Harry, sort of drowning in the river, I might, go, oh my God, I must save Harry. He's got this brilliant podcast and I want it to be a success. I jump in, but then I'm in the as I'm midair, I'm thinking to myself, oh God, I can't swim either. All of a sudden, we've doubled the level of suffering, and neither of us are getting rescued. So the idea is sometimes we can be so eager to jump in and do something that it actually makes the matter worse or the issue worse. And the wisdom there at that moment is knowing and recognizing, okay, well, I might have to try something else in order to be helpful, and that's turn to someone else or try to get someone else to come in and be helpful.
I like this idea of wisdom, the application of your knowledge and your intent. And so thank you for diving into that. I mean, maybe a couple of questions which people who listen to this podcast usually want to know as well. I think they're going to get a unique insight from you, given your research into compassion, but also your experience in therapy. How would you help someone decide, for example, where and how to dedicate their limited time and energy to not become more successful, but to become more purposeful in their life?
So what would I do to help them become more purposeful?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess, the first question is to ask, well, when you say purposeful, in what ways are you hoping to be more purposeful? Trying to get a sense from them what it is that they're thinking. I mean, purpose for me has a certain definition. What is their understanding of purpose? What would that look like, and where are they trying to seek that purpose? So I guess part of my discovery with them would be trying to get a sense of, in what areas of life are you seeking purpose, and what would purpose look like? Do they have any ideas on what that purpose might look like?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that'll just be the first part. Shed light onto what purpose actually would be.
Yeah.
Okay, and then once they share something, I don't know, maybe it's a dad who's decided that they want to provide for their family, but purposefully for them means it's not just finances. They want to be able to provide emotional security and fun and joy for their kids as well. Then what would the next step be? How would you then help them?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it would be a case of getting a sense, well, what emotional joy and warmth do you provide at the moment, do you think? Like, what are you doing at the moment, in your life? It gives you a sense that you are doing this. Are there any moments in your life where you have been doing this? And try to uncover that to get a sense of, do they even see it? Do they even recognize it? How would they know? And then it might be a case of, you could get quite deliberate and bring in some sort of, parenting techniques that we could use deliberately to try to create greater purpose and joy. So when you say joy and emotional warmth, is it both of you that are experiencing this when you're doing it? Say you went into a task and you were experiencing it, but your child didn't want to or wasn't experiencing it. Would that then be a fail, or what would we consider this? Or what if they came to you and instigated, but you weren't happy? Do you want to be more open to doing it? Saying yes when they come and approach you? Would that be? So exploring those parts to help guide the kind of judgments, I suppose, in the behaviours as well, would be important.
Yeah, that makes sense. You help clarify what they actually want by purpose. Then you clarify where they're actually doing it already, and then you provide them with the specific techniques if they need them.
Or even asking them, sometimes what we'll do is we've got this terrific skill of mental time travel. And it's kind of, okay, well, imagine you are living your life of purpose and joy with your kids. and it's 12 months from now, what is it that you are doing? What do you see yourself doing differently? And so just eyes closed, do that kind of meditative um, imagining, and then coming back and asking, so what were you doing? What did you notice yourself doing with your kids and feeling towards them and saying? And then, okay, well, knowing that, what would you say to yourself right now that you had to do? So part of that is always trying to get them to bring out their own intuitive wisdom on how to work with it, because then you can validate and go, yeah, I mean, look, all we have to do is slow it down and kind of reflect in a couple of ways, and all of a sudden, bang, you've come up with some incredible ideas on what would work best for you and your child, which is exactly what we kind of want. Did you? And then you can kind of reflect back on that, like, did you think you were capable of that, or does that surprise you? And sometimes I go, oh God, yeah. I mean, it's much easier now here with you than at home. And so, well, again, you've chosen to come here and make the time to do something like this, I suspect. Yep. So that's really important.
Yeah, okay. And so to answer that question of where and how to dedicate the limited time and energy to be more purposeful, you'd say just do it in the reflection piece. Take a moment to step out and work on your life rather than always working in it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, part of it is that's starting to build more wise intent, So if you're in it and you're just throwing yourself at it, there can be this sense of sometimes hitting your head against a brick wall. And so sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's take a step outside and get a sense of actually what's the state of play? Is it happening at all? Perhaps it's happening more often than I realize. I mean, often what we will do to begin with is we'll just say to someone, I just want you to monitor on this form how often you have emotional joy with your child. That's all I want you to do. Don't do anything else, but for the week ahead, I want you to jot it all down. Just by monitoring, they'll do more. Right. And so it's just we haven't even put that into place, an action of goal. But just by virtue of monitoring, they'll start to do it more often. Or perhaps the bigger insight is it's happening more often than I realize. The classic one is with instructions. A lot of parents will come in and sort of say, they just never listen. They're really non-compliant. A little rat bag kind of thing is sometimes what is said. And then you're like, okay, can you just monitor how many instructions you give each day between now and next week, just on this tally sheet, just do a tick. And then you'll come back and parent will come back and say, so how was that? And the parents will immediately say, I give way too many instructions. On Monday, I gave like 100 instructions. It's like, I have to do that. It's like, no, okay, well, maybe the thing that we need to change is how frequently we're giving the instructions. Maybe that we just don't need to give that. So that becomes the behavior change, not trying to increase the child doing what you say, but actually will shift your behavior, reduce the amount of instructions you give because you've realized that, 2/3 of them are unnecessary. And then all of a sudden you notice a change.
I like this focus you've had on ultimately controlling the controllables. If I try and quickly recap like the key themes we've spoken about in this conversation, then you'll have a chance to correct whatever I've stuffed up or gotten slightly wrong. But also maybe even highlight what you feel is most relevant to the people who are listening. Yeah. I mean, I guess when I started out talking about success, you're like, I don't really care that much about success. Maybe it's in line with valuing, like with achieving things that you value. But the term success can often lead to inferiority because it's normally a binary when you're talking about monitoring in terms of output and performance. And so you're more focusing on it in terms of contributing in a meaningful way. And so using your skill set in a way that reduces human suffering. I think you spoke about physical suffering, emotional suffering, and I think the third was resource suffering, which can all have overlap, of course. And so instead of looking at the outcome of what you want to achieve, instead look at what you want to be doing as a more powerful way to approach it. And you were talking about, I think, enhancing satisfaction and mastery and identifying more meaning. And when we're talking about your journey, there were like 3 pivotal points you referred to. There was your dad being available for a chat and always giving you support. But that was not just that moment. It probably reminded you of all of the moments where you were able to take risks because you had the immediate support. There was watching a movie that we both love, Hunting. And that just got you into this idea of what psychology actually is. And someone who seems to have been one of your key mentors in life, Paul Gilbert. And he founded compassion focused therapy, and he inspired you to have fun, right? Like in the center of ideas.
Is so generous. I mean, after you've said all that, I kind of feel uh, negative about the success part. I'm all for success. Obviously, if someone in their life had more success than not success, I would be like, yeah, that's fantastic. I guess I'm coming from working in those who are experiencing disorder. So,
Mm,
um, a heavy depression or something like that. Often we'll look at shifting out of a kind of a competitive kind of
mm,
focus, which often has success attached to it, into a compassionate motivation. Where, of course, success is absolutely nice and you want the wins,
mm.
absolutely. But perhaps some more of the kind of byproduct.
Right. Not at the expense of self-criticism, like thinking that if you're like if you drop self-criticism, then you're accepting mediocrity, right?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
at that expense.
No, exactly. And so part of it, I mean, that could just be an experiment in and of itself. You could ask people, well, drop your self criticism for the week, see how you go.
Mm.
Wonder how you'll do. Only a
See
week.
how it actually goes.
See how people have this great fear of like, no, I must keep it, I must keep it. And it's like, who's telling you that? Well, my critic is telling me that. It's like the critic only cares about the critic, and that's all the critic will do. I mean, there was one study done where self compassion, makes you want to make up for uh, your moral failings, right? It makes you
Mm,
want to mend those and repair those. It makes you want to be the self compassion makes you want to be a better person, um, and put the time and effort into achieving that, as opposed to try to forget them or berate yourself constantly for them. I mean, that's one of the big things. Some will come in because they've done something horrible. Um, But the thing that they did that was horrible was years ago.
mm.
And it's kind of like, okay, well, yep, I understand you want to punish yourself for this. That makes sense. How long are you planning on punishing yourself for this? How long is that? Have you thought about it? And often they haven't thought about how long they need to punish themselves. It's okay, yeah, we'll punish, but how long do you want to punish for? Do you know when enough will be enough?
Not for the remaining 50% of your life that's left. How about that? Let's.
When would be the moment that you'd be willing to no longer punish?
Yeah, cool. We spoke about how to cultivate compassion. You referred to the idea of the ideal compassionate other,
Yeah.
someone else, or ideally yourself. Meditation or imagery, and you were saying that that's to overcome chronic pain through mindfulness.
Oh, yeah.
Chronic because it's always there. Learning how to self-regulate, which I think flows into meditation, but also the compassionate other. And there was another. I think it was feeling like you're of help to others rather
Right.
than being hurtful.
Yeah, focusing on trying to do something for another.
Mm. Yeah, seeing how you can help
Great
others
sense.
by doing something for another. Yep. And then you were, and that flowed nicely into what advice would you give someone who's frustrated that other people aren't as compassionate to them, right? Well, firstly, have a little bit more self-compassion for yourself, probably because your sense of worth shouldn't rely on how compassionate others are to you. But also the fact that you can be compassionate to others increases the amount of compassion that you feel, is a very powerful message that you shared there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we spoke about how to become more purposeful. Just identify what it is for you, clarify it, and then work out the steps to be able to do it.
As long as it doesn't cause harm. So the big part of compassion is, yep, like in work in therapy, I'd be like, yes, I'd be happy to help you, as long as it's not deliberately trying to cause harm to someone.
Mm.
So there will be some who'll come in and is like, I want to hurt this person. They did this to me. It's like, okay, I get you want to hurt, but that is not a purpose I will sign up for.
That's not the purpose that I'm going to help you achieve.
Exactly. But some will. Some will come in very angry, very hostile, with vengeance. You
Mm.
see it play out in movies all of the time. Someone does something bad, a bad guy, and they do something really, really bad. And then that kind of justifies the good guy coming in and doing something bad and killing them. And we kind of celebrate that. And it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to help lead you with a purposeful life of seeking vengeance. Um, I can help you deal with the pain, though, that you experience as a result of that hurt, and try to help in a way that might bring some kind of compassionate closure to this. That might still mean there's consequence and actions you take for that, absolutely, but perhaps not vengeance.
Mm. Yeah, I like that.
Um,
Yeah, cool. I don't even, I often forget how much our lives can play out based off what we've seen on the movies. I
Oh yeah,
often
well,
forget that.
they play out how we fantasize about the world and what we
Mm.
keep coming back to. I mean, you see it between countries, between groups, between footy teams. Something did something bad once. We've even forgotten who it was and when it happened, but it was done. And we must seek pain and retribution for all eternity. And it's just back and forth.
Mm.
There's like a great book written. There's like 7 basic plots to every movie or every story.
Yep.
With the vengeance kind of being a key one.
You're obviously a very dedicated dad, a parent, and you care a lot about your kids and making sure that they become more holistically successful, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that they become kind of best versions or as best as possible versions of themselves that they can be. Uh, how do you plan on doing that, or what specific traits and mindset do you want to instill in them to make sure they have the best chance of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the best thing that I try to do in order to be there for them is not think of myself as trying to as parenting them,
Mm.
but rather of just trying to be a parent for them. So parenting implies I'm trying to fashion them into something, whereas I'm not trying to fashion them into something because I don't know what it is that they are wanting to fashion
Mm.
themselves into. Like I wouldn't call a friendship with my friend as I'm friending you, Harry.
Mm.
Because friending
Stop
kind
friending me, James. That feels a little bit intimidating, actually.
of means I'm trying to turn you, Harry, into something that I'm perhaps wanting. So what I guess I'm trying to do with my kiddos is when they, I've definitely showed them things I'm interested in. Kids are naturally interested in what you do, just naturally. But equally, what they show interest in, I also try to show interest in and try to understand more of, which is kind of fascinating for me as well, because you start to get insights into things that I would never have thought about, you know, learning about and so on. So I think that sometimes, the West has become obsessed with this idea on trying to turn kids into something. And in fact, there's a whole style of parenting, tiger parenting, which is kind of like very controlling and kind of focusing into turning kids into some kind of specific product or outcome or
Mm.
something like that. And I think that kind of causes, there's trade-offs with that. Whereas I think what I try to do with them is as soon as you try to be a parent for them, it kind of shifts the goalposts a lot.
Mm. And so, what do you attempt to instill in them, if anything?
Yeah, well, obviously, compassion,
Mm.
openness, playfulness, these sorts of things. How that shows differs between my daughter and my son.
I'm
You
sure.
So, my son's obsessed with kind of, building things and stuff of this nature. My daughter just loves singing all of the time. Now, I'm not a gifted singer, but I will get engaged and sing with her all of the time, even when we're out in public. Because I love hearing her sing, and there are just little moments where I'll start singing something, I'll sing a line, and then she'll sing a line, and you're just
Mm.
doing that together and making that fun. Now that's not something I would do, but she likes it, and when she does it, I want to show that there's joy in me hearing and seeing that, because then that shows that there's someone caring in about what it is that you find of interest. Um, and so me trying to do that for them is kind of what I would like to do, and also for them to feel when they look back on their childhood, that dad was the kind of guy who was there and accepted even when I was causing life. Um, mayhem. And I sometimes struggle with that one. Sometimes, late at night, something happens, you yell, you lose your cool. And then, of course, I engage in a lot of self-loathing and self-attacking. And I'm like, hang on just a second. Just compassion.
What would your compassionate ideal other say to you, James?
James, come on, man. What's going on? But yeah. That's about that. It. I mean, it's just hard because you're kind of culturally presented with a lot of this is what you should be doing, and it's very easy to get caught up in those messages that are kind of being sent that you need to consume. But I think fundamentally, our current culture is at a mismatch over what is the parenting we actually need to be a thriving human.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you, James.
Oh, thanks, Harry.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Success with Purpose, and I also hope that you feel capable to apply some of the perspectives and learnings from this episode in your own life. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like and subscribe below. And until next time, live with purpose.